The burnt smell of steak mingled with Marjorie's forced, muffled sobs, coiling around my wrist like a damp cotton thread as I gripped my knife and fork. "Elias, look at this meat." My mother-in-law pushed her plate toward me, the china clinking sharply against the wooden table. "I specifically fried it to the doneness you loved as a kid, but Lillian said we need less oil and less salt." My old eyes are failing me, and I got flustered and forgot to turn off the heat. She lifted her wrinkled hand and pressed it dramatically to her chest. Her gold ring glinted with a cold light under the warm yellow dining room lamp. "Back when your father was still working at the factory, who would have fussed over this? I used to wash clothes for 5 people every day and make lunch for the workers too. My fingers were covered in blisters from the steam, and no one ever said a harsh word to me." Lillian's fingers tightened around her water glass. Beads of condensation trickled down her knuckles and onto the tablecloth, spreading into a small dark stain. "Mom, I just mentioned the doctor's advice for you to cut down on fat. That's all." Her voice was steady, unlike mine. My breath was trembling in time with Marjorie's sniffles. "That's all?" Marjorie's voice spiked suddenly, the legs of her chair scraping sharply against the floor. "You think my cooking's terrible? You think I'm old and useless? I left Kentucky to move with you to Chicago, not to be bullied. When I was pregnant with Elias, I trudged through the snow to pick up food stamps in the dead of winter. My knees still ache from the cold. Now I can't even cook a meal in peace." She suddenly covered her face, her shoulders shaking violently. "Howard, look at the wonderful daughter-in-law your son married." My father-in-law Howard looked up from his newspaper. His eyes, behind his glasses, didn't meet mine or Lillian's. He just glanced at Marjorie indifferently. "Eat." He buried his face back in the financial section, as if the farce unfolding before him was no more than a gust of wind blowing past the window. Before retiring, he'd been a quality inspector at the auto factory. He'd been quiet and reserved all his life, his only hobbies reading the newspaper and drinking bourbon. No storm in the family had ever ruffled him. "Lillian, can't you just give Mom a little leeway?" I put down my knife and fork, my voice laced with a compromise I hated myself for. "Mom's getting on in years, and her health isn't good. Can't you just say less?" That sentence was like a match, instantly igniting the fire in Lillian's eyes. She looked at me, her gaze filled with disappointment and a coldness I didn't dare examine too closely. "Elias, this is the 3rd time I've reminded her to take her blood pressure medicine on time, the 2nd time I've suggested adjusting her diet, and the 1st time." Lillian paused, a faint tremor creeping into her voice. "The 1st time, she threw my new skincare products in the trash, calling me reckless with money. Then she turned around and used my credit card to buy a gold necklace, saying, 'Wearing this to church will make Elias look good.' You're lying." Marjorie shot to her feet, her chest heaving. "That necklace was for you. When you get pregnant and go to those mom-to-be gatherings, do you want to wear cheap plastic junk? I'm only doing this for your own good." Suddenly, her legs gave way. As she collapsed back into her chair, she deliberately scraped against the table leg, letting out a cry of pain. "My back, my old injuries acting up again. All from hunching over folding clothes at the laundromat to save up for Elias's college tuition back in the day." I jumped up to support Marjorie, then snapped at Lillian, "What are you standing there for? Go get the painkillers." Lillian didn't move. She just stared at me, unblinking, for a full 10 seconds before turning and walking into the kitchen. In those 10 seconds, I swear I heard something shatter, softly, but with a vibration that stung my eardrums. That night, Lillian slept in the study. I knocked 3 times, but she never opened the door. When I got up the next morning, there was fried eggs, toast, and a cup of warm milk on the kitchen table, with a note beside them, "Working overtime at the law firm. Don't wait up for me." Her handwriting was neat and unflustered, showing no sign of turbulence. Marjorie sat at the table, stirring her oatmeal with a spoon and sighing. Look at her, still holding a grudge. "Elias, Women need to be coddled, but I didn't do anything wrong, I'm only thinking of this family. I picked up the milk and took a sip, it was warm, but it pricked my throat like shards of ice. Scenes like this had played out countless times in the 3 months since Marjorie moved in. She was like a seasoned actress, always able to hit the exact notes that would get to me, the back of her working odd jobs secretly when I couldn't afford tuition, the dark circles under her eyes from sitting by my hospital bed for 3 days straight after my high school car accident, the hands that pressed crumpled savings into mine when I couldn't find a job after college. These memories, which should have been warm, had now become weapons she used to control the family, and I was the willing prisoner who surrendered without a fight. Lillian had come into my life when I was at my lowest. I just lost my job and spent every day holed up in my apartment drinking beer when she knocked on my door with a job posting. She was an intern at the law firm next door, and when she heard my landlord was about to evict me, she'd made a point of telling me her firm was hiring an administrative assistant. She was smart and independent, like a white poplar by Chicago's lakeshore, always standing tall. I'd chased her for 6 months, and when I proposed, she'd looked me in the eye and said, "Elias, I love your kindness, but I don't want that kindness to end up hurting me." I'd promised her then that it wouldn't, but now I was letting her down, again and again. Marjorie's misery was carefully packaged. At the church's bake sale, she'd cling to the pastor's hand and sob about being left alone in an empty house, even though Howard was sitting right next to her reading the newspaper, and how her son forgot his mother once he married. Then she'd replace all of Lillian's baked cookies with her own, saying, "My poor daughter-in-law is clumsy, her baking isn't fit for company." At the supermarket, she'd wipe tears in front of the cashier, claiming Lillian wouldn't let her buy fresh beef, forcing her to settle for discounted ground meat, even though I'd seen her use Lillian's supplementary card to buy a $300 tomahawk steak the previous week, saying, "It's for Howard's health." She'd even pretend to trip in front of the neighbors, blaming Lillian for mopping the floor too wet and nearly breaking her old bones, only to head off to the community bridge game looking energetic and lively. Every time Lillian confronted me about it, all I could say was, "Just endure it, Mom's had a hard life, she's getting old." I was like an ostrich, burying my head in the sand of filial piety, avoiding the disappointment in Lillian's eyes and the absurdity of Marjorie's behavior. Howard always stayed silent. He'd go out to the balcony to smoke when Marjorie threw a fit, and quietly tidy up the study Marjorie had messed up when Lillian was angry, but he never said a word of justice. Once, I asked him why he didn't try to talk Marjorie down. He exhaled a ring of smoke and said flatly, "She's been acting like this for a lifetime. She's used to it." The conflict finally erupted on Lillian's birthday. I'd booked a table at her favorite French restaurant in advance and bought the pearl necklace she'd been eyeing for ages. But when I got home from work, I found Marjorie lying on the couch, groaning and clutching her stomach, with a pile of medicine bottles beside her. "The doctor says I have a stomach bleed and need to be hospitalized for observation," she said, grabbing my hand and covering my face with her tears and snot. I'd planned to make Lillian a birthday cake, but now it looks like that's out of the question. Elias, am I just useless? I can't even do something nice for my daughter-in-law on her birthday. Lillian stood in the doorway, still holding the birthday balloons she'd just bought, her face pale. "I just called the community hospital. They said you had a full checkup this morning, and everything was normal." Her voice was soft, but there was an unprecedented firmness in it. "Mom, that medicine for your stomach bleed expired last year." Marjorie's sobbing cut off abruptly. Her eyes darted to Howard in panic. For the first time, Howard put down his newspaper and looked directly at Marjorie. "Marjorie, stop this nonsense. You're all ganging up on me." Marjorie shot upright, grabbing a cushion from the couch and throwing it at me. "Elias, you ungrateful wretch. I slaved to raise you, and now you're helping an outsider bully me." "She's not an outsider. She's my wife." I dodged the cushion, refusing to give in for the first time. Marjorie froze at those words, and tears welled up in Lillian's eyes. That night, Marjorie didn't throw a fit for the first time, she just locked herself in her room. Lillian leaned against my chest and whispered, "Elias, I don't want you to turn against your mother. I just want a fair home." I thought Marjorie would hold back, but instead, she resorted to even more extreme tactics. She started starving herself, lying in her room all day, drinking only a little water, and muttering about how life isn't worth living. Howard finally couldn't stay out of it. He asked me to talk, saying, "Marjorie's had a hard life. When you were little, we were poor, and she skipped meals for a month just to buy you a new pair of sneakers. But Lillian's not in the wrong either. You can't keep going on like this." He pulled a bank card out of his drawer. "This has our retirement savings. Take it, and find a way to balance things between them." I took the bank card to Lillian, but she shook her head. "Elias, money won't fix this." She opened her laptop and pulled up a document. "This is a record of Marjorie's expenses over the past 3 months, along with recordings of the things she said at church and in the community, and photos of her deliberately damaging my things." She pointed at the screen. "I don't want to sue her. I just want her to know there are limits to her behavior." The next morning, Lillian printed out the document and placed it on Marjorie's breakfast table. Marjorie's face flushed and paled as she read through the records. "What do you want?" Her voice lacked its usual arrogance, replaced by a hint of panic. "First, give me back my supplementary credit card." Lillian sat down, her tone calm. "Second, we'll split the household expenses evenly. Elias and I will cover you and Dad's living costs, but you can't use our money to buy luxury items anymore. Third, you can live your own life, but you can't interfere with our marriage, and you definitely can't make up lies to slander me. Fourth, if you starve yourself or pretend to be sick again, we'll take you for a full medical checkup, and all the costs will be deducted from your living expenses." "You're forcing me." Marjorie slammed her hand on the table. "You forced me first." Lillian took out her phone. "I've already contacted the community social worker. If you think we're treating you badly, we can ask the social worker to mediate. Or you can move to a nursing home. They have professional caregivers there who can take better care of you than we can." Marjorie looked at Lillian, then at me standing beside her, and suddenly burst into tears. This time, her sobs lacked their usual exaggeration, there was a genuine sense of grievance in them. "I'm just afraid you'll abandon me," she choked out. "Howard doesn't talk much since he retired, and Elias, ever since you got married, your eyes have only been on Lillian. I'm alone at home all day, with no one to talk to." Lillian froze, and so did I. It had never occurred to me that behind Marjorie's attention-seeking and harshness lay loneliness. That afternoon, Lillian signed Marjorie up for flower arrangement and cooking classes at the senior center, Marjorie's favorite hobbies. She even helped Marjorie get in touch with her old friends from Kentucky, so they could video chat regularly. Marjorie was reluctant at first, but after starting the classes, she changed completely. Every morning, she'd put on a new dress and head out, and in the afternoon, she'd come home chatting about interesting things that happened in class, even placing her flower arrangements in the living room vase. She stopped fixating on Lillian's every move, and no longer burst into tears at the drop of a hat. Once, when I got home from work, I found her and Lillian baking cookies together in the kitchen. The sunlight streamed through the window onto them, warm like a painting. Howard changed too. He no longer buried himself in the newspaper all day. Instead, he'd walk with Marjorie to the park, and sometimes even join them in baking cookies. One evening, as he sipped his bourbon, he patted my shoulder and said, "Elias, you married the right woman." On Lillian's birthday, we didn't go to the French restaurant. Instead, we cooked a lavish dinner at home. Marjorie brought out a homemade strawberry cake, with "Happy Birthday, Lillian" written in cream on top. "I was wrong before," she said, looking at Lillian with sincere eyes. "I shouldn't have been so selfish, so mean. Lillian took her hand and smiled. Mom, let's leave the past behind. Watching all this, my heart was filled with gratitude. I was grateful for Lillian's resolve and tolerance, that she hadn't left me when I was at my weakest. I was grateful for Marjorie's awakening, that she was willing to let go of her prejudice and desire for control. And I was grateful for Howard's quiet support, that he'd nudged me in the right direction when it mattered most. The wind on Oak Street always carries a faint scent of oak leaves. Once, I'd thought that wind held nothing but quarrels and oppression, but now it felt fresh and clean. I knew our family had gotten back on track not because someone had won, but because we'd all learned to understand and respect each other. Marjorie still occasionally talks about the hardships of the past, but no longer to gain sympathy, only to remind us to cherish the life we have now. Lillian still stands by her principles, but no longer to confront, only to protect the warmth of our home. And I'm no longer that spineless mama's boy. I've learned to balance my role as a husband and a son, to be a responsible man. That night, I watched Lillian and Marjorie chatting and laughing in the living room, with Howard sitting beside them, a faint smile on his lips. It suddenly dawned on me that family was never a battlefield. The conflicts and strife were just the result of everyone longing to be loved and seen. And the key to resolving it all was never compromise or retreat, but sincerity, understanding, and respect. Later, Marjorie became an active member of the senior center, even winning first prize in the community flower arrangement contest. Lillian's law firm thrived, and she even set up a public welfare group to help women facing difficulties in their marriages. I took a more challenging job. It's hard work, but every evening when I come home, the smell of food from the kitchen and the warm light in the living room fill me with strength. Sometimes I think back to those days filled with quarrels and conflict, Marjorie's tears, Lillian's disappointment, and my own weakness. But I don't regret it, because those days made each of us see our own flaws and learn how to love the people around us. The silent battle on Oak Street finally ended in warmth, and that warmth will light our way forward forever.